Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Humanity First dialogue. This is our fourth um, part to a series that I believe will continue. First of all, I'd like to welcome our participants who range from students, staff, faculty, alum, as well as some of our community members. So welcome. And I'd like to give a personal welcome to our guest, Dr. Eliah Bures, who's going to be officially introduced by Kelly Hine in just a few moments. There's a few housekeeping items that I would like to ask Gwen Larson to give us some guidance on. Go ahead, Gwen.
Sure, thank you. So as you know, Dr. Allen likes these forums to be interactive. So if you are in the Zoom with us and you would like to speak, please open up the participants button at the bottom of your screen, and you can highlight your own name in that list. And when you click more, I believe that's where you can raise your hand and we can call on you to participate. Those of you who are watching on YouTube, if you have questions or comments you would like to submit, you can jump over online to emporia.edu/live and use the submit questions button in the Humanity First event. And that is populating in real time a Google spreadsheet that we can grab your questions and comments out of and use. You also, if you have something you would like to say in the Zoom with, but don't maybe want to be on camera, you can use the chat function, but just understand everybody's going to see what you're chatting. So with that, Dr. Allen, it's back to you.
Okay, thank you, Gwen. As we go forward into our conversation, there's going to be two parts to this dialogue. The first part will introduce Dr. Bures and his writing, which I hope many of you had a chance to read, which was linked into the invitation. The second part will be discussions regarding how we can move ideals into action, as I believe Dr. Bures has done with the work that he continues to do. And as we move forward, there are a series of questions that have been asked, and we'll do our best to respond to those, as well as invite our participants to ask and engage as they see and inspired to do so. So with that, I want to introduce Kelly Hine. I'm happy to have her join us, and please tell us a little bit about yourself and how we arrived at this place. Go ahead, Kelly.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kelly Hine. I'm responsible for marketing and media relations here at Emporia State University. I am so excited today. Thank you for having me to introduce my friend Eliah Bures, Dr. Eliah Bures. We actually grew up together in little old Garnett, Kansas. We worked at the Pizza Hut together in high school. Lots of fun memories there. And on the call to Garnett, you're never far from Garnett. So Alvin Peters, who is an employee at Emporia State University, taught Eliah, myself, and Aaron Bauk, who's also an alum and on the call today, history in high school. So we, us Garnettians, we stick together. So I'm just really excited to introduce him today. So I'll get on with his bio. I'm going to read it. I should have asked him how to pronounce one of these words before I did it, but I didn't. So Dr. Eliah Bures is a visiting scholar at the Center for Right-Wing Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. He got his undergraduate from University of Kansas, and he got his PhD in modern European history from UC Berkeley in 2014. 2014 to 2017, he was a postdoctoral fellow at IE University in Madrid and Segovia, Spain, and is currently a visiting scholar, like I already talked to you guys about. And he's completing his first book, Friends and Enemies. Ernst Younger, that was the question I was going to ask you. Is that right? He can correct
me. You were pretty close. Younger, okay. Yeah, Younger.
Thank you. And the countercultural survival of the German far right. His publications have appeared in many different places, including Modern Intellectual History, Journal for the Study of Radicalism, H. German, German Quarterly, Foreign Policy, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. And when I was chatting with some of our fellow classmates, our high school graduates, Dana Procht said, "Do you remember when we were in the library in high school and someone was looking at Time magazine and saw they published Eliah's response to an article they had written? I bet they didn't know he was a teenager at the time." You remember that? Maybe
It was Newsweek.
I'll tell Dana.
Yeah, no, it was it was just it was something about the Unabomber, and I wrote like a 2-sentence, letter to the editor. So.
That's good. So we'll move on to why we're actually here today. So I'll read a little bit of the intro, Eliah, that you had in your article. On July 3rd, this is from Eliah's article. The publisher of the Anderson County Review, a local newspaper in Kansas, Garnett, I'm embarrassed to say that happened in our newspaper, a political cartoon was posted to the paper's Facebook page. The publisher, Dane Hicks, who also serves as the county's GOP chairman, had created the image himself in response to a recent mask order issued by Governor Kelly. The cartoon depicted Governor Kelly wearing a mask adorned with the Jewish Star of David. In the background, women and children are being loaded onto trains. The caption made read, "Lockdown Laura says, put on your mask and step onto the cattle car." I know for me, that was really jolting to see. That just really, really bothered me. So in his beautifully written piece, Eliah discusses thoughtlessness versus critical thinking, how people can buy into and repeat narratives of a party line without really stopping to think about the true meaning of those words and actions. So if you haven't read the article yet, I really encourage you to take some time and do that. So I'm ready to move on to why we're actually here today, to talk about moving ideas into action. And there are lots of ways that taking action, as Dr. Allen said, can manifest. Eliah here, he used his knowledge and talent to take some action. So Eliah, what compelled you to respond to this political cartoon? And what was your intention, or what were you hoping to achieve when you began writing the piece?
Yeah, I think, anything I write, one of the things I'm trying to do is just make sense of it for myself. In the process of writing about something, I learned a tremendous amount. So clearly I was trying to process the event for myself. I remember when I first heard about it, it was 4th of July weekend, and I was at the beach. So it's a Northern California beach, don't be too jealous. It was windy and the sand isn't, you can't get in the water. It's too cold. But I was at the beach and my wife told me about it. And the first thing that struck me about it is how kind of incoherent the political cartoon was. Its symbolism, and I talk about this in the piece a little bit, its symbolism is just bungled. And so on the drive home from the beach, I was trying to think about, like, what does it mean to come up with a political cartoon that ultimately doesn't make much sense? And I think, to give Dane Hicks some credit, and I don't intend to be, rude or condescending or confrontational really at all toward him. I don't really know him, personally. Maybe I've interacted with him once or twice, years ago. But I think what he was doing, to give him, not really credit, but just kind of, understand his position, is he was trying to, drum up interest in his newspaper. He runs a small town newspaper. In today's media climate, that cannot be an easy thing. And I think what he does is he uses Facebook, basically sensationalistically, to drum up readership, to get people talking about his newspaper. And so I think what he was doing is he very, very hastily, some evening, he was using Photoshop and just kind of slapping together a coronavirus, Governor, Kelly, mask order political cartoon, without really thinking about what he was doing, just slapping it together, get it out there, get it on Facebook, get it on your webpage, and then, count on the resulting uproar to keep interest in his newspaper sustained. I suspect that was what was behind it. But what interested me in the whole event was how he could do something that really, it was politically very serious, and it's very hurtful to a lot of people. As you said, this bothered you too. It bothered a lot of people in the county. How he could do something with so little thought. So that was really the kind of conundrum. I was driving home from the beach that day, and I was thinking, what does it mean to come up with a political cartoon that shows so little thinking, so little reflection? And really, that's where I got started thinking about it. I was just trying to solve that problem for myself, and that quickly took me, given my background, I studied German history in the 20th century. I study the far right. I study totalitarianism, Nazism, things like this. It very quickly took me to Hannah Arendt's famous idea of thoughtlessness as a source of political evil, in which we're not motivated by, it's not driven by ignorance so much. It's not necessarily a stupidity. I don't think stupidity is behind this. I think he just wasn't thinking. I think he wasn't curious enough how this issue would seem from other points of view. I think he wasn't looking at facts very plainly. I think he wasn't judging things sensibly. So that's really how I got started thinking about it.
And did you, when you started writing the article, did you see it as any kind of support for minorities, or taking action? It was really for you and your thought process, but when you got to writing and you were into it, did you see how it could be supporting other groups and taking some sort of action and addressing something that is or was wrong?
Yeah, no, I think it was. So I appreciate the follow-up question. I think of it as political action in a larger sense. And I'll put it this way, is I care deeply about the quality of our public sphere in this country. The public sphere is a public good in the way that a national park is a public good. We have to support it. We have to take care of it. We have to act responsibly in it. And if we don't do these things, it will degrade. It'll go to, it'll go to seed. It won't turn out well over time. And I think really, the way that culture war has worked, and I'd be happy to kind of, unpack what I think that term means. The way it has worked, at least since the 1990s, so when we were coming of age, it's really to just, it's to inject a style of, a rhetorical style and a way of framing politics that is demonizing, that's polarizing, that's shallow, that's simplistic. And I think over the course of my adult life, our adult lives, that style of political thinking it's really taken root. It's really taken over the political sphere. So what I was trying to do ultimately was to push back against that. And one of the ways I was trying to do that was to write a piece in which I wasn't simply attacking Dane Hicks. I didn't call him an idiot. I made it very clear I don't think he's stupid. I wasn't trying, and I tried to leave a space at the end of it for forgiveness, for rebuilding trust. He and I acknowledge too that he himself kind of walked back the piece. He apologized for it. He recognized that it was reckless and irresponsible. And he himself thanked the people that he was in dialogue with. I think especially some Jewish leaders in the Kansas City area. He thanked them for their recourse to civil discourse. And so I simply wanted to write about the issue and to write about his thought process in that kind of in kind, in a way that leaves open a space for a continuation of civil discourse, of civil thinking, of rebuilding trust and interaction with people in a frankly decent way. So I was trying to defend a kind of political good, I think, and that political good, the public sphere, when it functions honestly, when it's fact-based, when it's calm, when it's able to trust people and to respond charitably to people, that I think is a foundation for any kind of meaningful social justice action, any kind of meaningful political progress. So I think about what I was doing. It was kind of at a more foundational level, taking political action, I would say.
Thank you. Can you? So, you talked about what compelled you to write the article, and you talked a little bit about shallow culture war thinking, and from a really high level, what that means. Can you kind of expand on the thought of this, shallow culture war and the impact it's having on our political landscape and matters of social justice today? So, how are you seeing this really manifest in our current events?
Can I interject with because if we jump right there to that question, we might be missing what you mean when you wrote about culture war, and you mentioned thinking. You mentioned thinking attention. These are some words that you use. You mentioned the danger of thoughtlessness, and thoughtlessness was not stupidity. Actually, you mentioned that there's intelligence at times operating in thoughtlessness. You mentioned the ideals of oversimplification, and you talked about a lot of different things that really, I think, bridged the way between what was occurring in Germany and what's occurring today. So with those concepts, could you help bridge the way before we get to answering the question that Kelly posed?
Yeah,
And so
I'm not
there's,
sure. Could you sharpen the question? I'm not
there's,
entirely sure.
what I'm asking you here is to walk us through this idea of culture war from um,
Yeah,
Nazi Germany,
yeah.
and what some of the activities um, that were occurring during that time, and the thoughts, and
Okay, yeah, sure.
right, and then that can help shape our understanding, and give us a reference point as we think about today.
Yeah. So, I mean, a culture war, just to try to define it, one way to think about it, a culture war is what happens when there are two groups in a society that have essentially different visions of reality, different definitions of reality. So I was catching up on the vice presidential debate, which I missed, and so I was watching it on YouTube just over the weekend. And to listen to Kamala Harris and Mike Pence talk about the United States, you'd think they're referring to different societies. I mean, according to one side, the Trump administration's response to the coronavirus pandemic has been an epic failure. It's just been historically awful. It's a dereliction of duty, top to bottom. And if you listen to the other side, he's been singularly effective in mobilizing the apparatus of our healthcare system and the government to produce a vaccine. And you can just go kind of across the board in every domain. The environment, the economy. It's like they're referring to different societies. And so that difference, that phenomenon, in which you get two groups in a society that see reality in starkly different, varying terms, that's the result of a culture war. And so the actual war in a culture war is over the apparatus of reality definition. It takes place in the media, it takes place in education, it takes place in the law to some extent. I mean, the current struggle over whether Amy Coney Bryant will be, nominated or approved, and appointed to the Supreme Court. I mean, the legal system helps define reality. I mean, what I mean is, what is the way in which a society talks about itself to itself? How does it understand itself? What are the concepts? What are the narrative? Go ahead.
Right, as well as how rules are established and enforced.
Yeah.
The values, the traditions, the beliefs, the ways of being are part of the war that's happening. And that seems to be what happened in Nazi Germany, and was a global movement, as a matter of fact.
Well, that's exactly right. Yeah, to bring it back to Nazi Germany very, very briefly, the genocide, the Holocaust against the Jews in the Second World War was only possible because a highly distorted, tendentious, I mean, frankly, factually very thin and ridiculous worldview was able to take root in a culture. Right. And it was a worldview that saw, I mean, it's very important to understand genocide, that genocide is always, in its own viewpoint, in its own understanding, it's always self-defense. I mean, it seems paradoxical, it seems absurd, but according to the Nazi mindset, to think like a Nazi, which is something in general we should try not to do, but if you want to understand the Holocaust, you have to do it. According to the Nazis, they were acting in self-defense against the Jewish people, who they thought, polluted their culture, polluted their race, and also were the authors of all the universalist ideas that would challenge their view of reality, which is that there is no morality. Really, all there is the war for survival among different peoples in the world. That's how a Nazi sees human history. And so what would you need to push back against that? Well, you would need universalist schemes like, Christianity, for instance. Well, Jesus Christ was a Jew. You could use Marxism, which is a universalist scheme. Well, Karl Marx was a Jew. So you can begin to see how Nazis think about human history and why you would have to have a very, very distorted, very frankly bizarre notion that they are acting against Nazis or against Jews in self-defense in order to even have the legitimacy within a movement, within a society to enact something like that. So that's a good way to tie it back. I mean, a culture war happened in Germany in the 1920s, and one side, frankly, won. And its distorted perception of reality was then what made something like the Holocaust possible. Yeah.
So let's go forward to Kelly's question now, and make some specific, I guess, points about what may be happening now. I think we have two of our faculty members who I've emailed or who have emailed me, two or three, and I want to invite them to join in the conversation before we move too far forward. That would be Dr. Brown and Dr. Emmer, and Dr. Smith as well. So please be prepared to join the conversation. Dr. Bures, go ahead and share your thoughts about the culture war today and how these two may relate. And this is all within this context of ideals to action, and how do we get to the truth of a matter in order to know what to think and how to take action. So I'm using this as a platform, an example of what we can pay attention to and how we can think, have certain principles, and then apply those principles.
Yeah. Well, I would say, two things. It's a result. It's a fruit of culture war thinking, that there are no complex issues, really. Everything is reduced to a stark binary. So, what climate policy, what we do, as a government, as a society with regard to climate, that's highly complex, right? You need a lot of understanding, a lot of facts on board. But culture war simply wants to reduce that to two stark positions, right? So you either have, one side that thinks that, global warming is an existential threat to the United States or to the world, frankly, and to humanity, and we need something like the Green New Deal to fight it. And the other side thinks that it's a Chinese conspiracy. That's the fruit of culture war. It takes a highly complex issue and it reduces it into two stark opposing binaries. And the binaries aren't just adversarial. Politics is always adversarial. What's important about culture war is that the binaries become existential. They become existential in the sense that each side thinks the other is a fundamental threat to their nation, to humanity, to their way of life. So it's a fruit of culture war thinking that each side always thinks the other is destroying America. That language of who's destroying America, that's a hallmark of culture war thinking. And one of the other things that I think is particularly insidious about culture war thinking is that it lulls you into thinking you are taking action, right? So you watch a YouTube video, you read a sensationalistic headline on Yahoo News, or you see a meme on Facebook, something like that. You get angry, you're whatever side you're on, right or left. You feel like you've been, I don't know, like you've done something virtuous. You've seen the enemy, you've gotten angry at the enemy, you've typed something, you've forwarded the meme, whatever your action is, you comment in a com box or whatever it is. You have the kind of illusion that you've taken meaningful action, and that you have, I don't know, that you've staved off the destruction of something valuable, something important to you. And I think that's an illusion. I don't think you've done anything more than just contribute to the slow decay of our public sphere. And so, if you wanted to link this back to action, I would say that in some ways, culture war thinking is actually, it's antagonistic to meaningful social action, to meaningful political engagement, because it lulls you into thinking that you've done something when really you've done very little. It feels good, it's satisfying, but it doesn't result in anything more than forwarding a meme at the end of the day.
Sure, thank you. I want to invite Dr. Brown. Welcome, Dr. Brown. I know that you didn't expect to be called on, but I know that you have a very interesting background that really, as a philosopher, can really connect with this topic. And since we're speaking about culture wars, we're talking about ideals to action, and we have used the German historical experience as a platform. I'd like to invite you to just make any comments or observations and you have the mic.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I wasn't expecting that, but I'll see what I can do. One of the things that I was impressed with Eliah, is that how you pronounce your name?
Yeah, it's Eliah. Yeah.
With Eliah's discourse is the talk on thoughtlessness. And as opposed to being stupid, thoughtlessness is where you just latch onto an idea or the words and never get past those words, and they sediment in your mind and form part of your character and this sort of thing. And you really haven't thought them through and that sort of thing. And it seems to me that so much of our public discourse is now dependent on that very phenomenon. We throw platitudes at each other, and it's very difficult to get past those platitudes. And as long as we can't get past those platitudes, those little short phrases and this sort of thing about who's responsible for ruining America and that sort of thing, then it's just more noise and more noise and more noise. And so dialogue really gets silenced in that form of conversation. And what I liked about the essay that you wrote was it was a serious attempt to lay out that particular problem and then find a way to get past that.
Right, and that is probably the most important aspect of the writing is the skill and the insight to move forward. How do we do that for ourselves? How do we do that for our communities? How do we do that for humanity? All three of those tie together here. Thank you, Dr. Brown. Dr. Emmer, do you have any remarks that you would like to share?
Yeah, I sort of have a question because I fully agree with Professor Brown. And what Professor Brown is talking about to some degree was the way that you can interact with other people to try to have a more, to bring them out of that, to talk in a way that brings other people out of thoughtlessness. And, there's all kinds of books about how to talk to the other side, how to convince the other side. But I was curious if Dr. Bures had any ideas about techniques that a person can use to try to stop themselves from being thoughtless when they're dealing with other people, especially if there was some sort of little tricks that a person can use in their own mind to pull themselves out of thoughtlessness while they're in it. If you have any ideas on that, I'd be curious to know.
That's an excellent question. I think for me, I don't personally use Facebook. Partly, I mean, not that I have any greater virtue in general when it comes to the internet. I probably don't. But things like that in the past, I'm thinking 10 years ago, I would get so riled up, and I could lose 8 hours, being a combox warrior, and nothing changed. Nobody's convinced, in an online platform like that. It really only exists to re-solidify whatever ideological orientation you kind of bring into it. So I think one practical measure is simply to avoid platforms like that, or to be very, very, very careful when you go into them. I mean, another one is if you're seeing a meme, if you're reading a headline and you're angry, I think I would pump the brakes. I would ask, how am I being manipulated? Essentially, I mean, how is a headline being written to get me? It's clickbait. How is it being written to get me to click on it? How is it playing on my kind of primate brain, as it were? I think, yeah, be very aware of your emotional responses to things. If it's asking you to think, if it's challenging a kind of simplistic framework, an us versus them narrative that you have, perhaps read on, perhaps go deeper, perhaps follow that link. But if it just seems to be scratching you right where you itch, in a way that just riles you up and makes you feel good, I think I would be very suspicious of that. And I find this all the time. I do it too. We're all, we all have the same kind of brains, basically. Particularly, for me, it's Yahoo News. headline. So I have a Yahoo, email account. It's constantly showing me, and 90% of those, I have to like hold my hand back from clicking on those because they are just designed to suck me in. And then they're almost always superficial and they're sensationalistic. So I think just being aware of the emotional reactions that you have when you see something like that. Now I'm just spitballing that answer. I mean, that's something that comes to mind for me. But it's a great question.
Well, I would concur in general. I would say that, the first thing that, each of us should do is check in with ourselves. I've had the privilege of working with some great people across campus in different areas. And one of the things that we do is we ask the question, what's on your mind? Because whatever that is that's on your mind is going to influence what comes next. So let's check that. And if what's on your mind is meaningful to the occasion, then it's probably going to produce some really good fruit. But if it's not, then you're not going to produce anything that's worth the time of day. So that's kind of the first question. And then after that, I tend to ask, what is it that is your interest? What is your interest in this matter? Whatever that matter is. If we're dealing with a budget concern, or we're dealing with student enrollment, or we're addressing faculty development, or safety on campus, images that we want to promote, what's my interest in it? And that helps me recognize the lens that I'm looking through. And from that, I can identify blind spots, or others can help me identify blind spots. And now I get a chance to go to the next phase, which is what you mentioned, Dr. Bures, which is other points of view, identifying and recognizing other points of view, not the binary you and me perspective. So, and that those simple steps can be used when you're dealing with someone on a one-on-one basis personally, when you're dealing with small groups, family, or community, or you're looking at an organization overall. So I totally agree, and I appreciate the contributions from our faculty and from you. I think we have some questions that are coming in. I would like to ask
Dr. Allen.
question 6, yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Aaron Bauk is on the Zoom and has a question. If we could get him queued up.
Okay.
Hey, Eliah, I'm not going to call you Dr. Bures. I'm just going to refer to you as your name.
That's
so
good.
my question for you is, when you talk about kind of the culture wars, and as I raise my son, and you and Aaron raise your kids, and Kelly does the same, what are techniques that you've found that work to allow our children or someone else to kind of develop their own viewpoint versus just going to kind of those polar sides that you've talked about, like Harris and Pence, where it's just two kind of different worlds? How do you try to teach children to create their own viewpoint, just not fall into that easy trap?
Yeah, well, that's really a parenting question. It's good to see you, Aaron.
Yeah, good to see you as well.
We live in Berkeley, and Berkeley's a pretty left-wing place. And I won't pretend that I'm.
You're as left as I am right here down in Alabama.
Could be, yeah. And I'm not a Trump supporter. I'll just say that. And my son, who's 9, has certainly absorbed things just from the climate and conversations around the dinner table and stuff. And frankly, he inclines to think that Trump supporters are idiots. And he makes comments like, just like I can't remember it. I wish I could. I mean, it's just like he's a bad man. People who support him are bad. That's the gist of it. And a number of times I've had to remind him that there's people that we love and and respect, and one in our lives who have voted for President Trump and probably will again. And also that it's more complex than it seems. He has a 9-year-old's view of reality, which is he doesn't understand political decision making. I mean, obviously not. No 9-year-old does. and just try to lay out sympathetically some of the reasons why people we know support President Trump. So the abortion issue, for instance, just to try to explain, in a way that's age appropriate for a 9-year-old, but just to try to make this the dichotomizing, simplifying, demonizing organ in his brain, which all human beings have, just to try to just put the brakes on that. Just like, no, let's think about this in a little more kind of calm and sober and non-polarizing way. So I've had some conversations with him along those lines. I don't know how effective it is at the end of the day. We'll see. But
Okay.
yeah, no, it's a great question. I think we all have a responsibility as parents to, children, everybody, the research on this is clear. Children tend to absorb the political viewpoint of their parents. To just foster non-demonizing, sober, fact-based thinking in our children when it comes to the political sphere. Yeah. So I feel that obligation profoundly myself. And I guess I'm doing what everybody else is doing, is just trying to figure out how to raise kids who think that way.
I know, Aaron, you didn't ask me, but since I have a couple of cents in my pocket, I'm going to share it. Okay.
Please, yeah.
I believe that, as parents and as educators, ultimately the ideal is to expose our learners, whoever they are, to the truth of the matter. And we want, and it's not my truth that I'm searching for. It is the actual truth. So if we're on that quest for truth, then we allow for different points of view to come into that pool of meaning, or that space where we can draw from. So for example, if we're talking about abortion, then we want to share the political view of the right, we want to share the political view of the left, but we also want to make sure people understand why abortion even occurs, okay? And under what circumstances might that be necessary, or might that be a choice, And then we talk about the value of life, and we make sure that they know that there's something that happens before a woman gets pregnant, all right? And if you're a man, you have a responsibility at that time, okay, before any of this discussion comes about. So I think we have to be as comprehensive in age-appropriate manners to educate our children, and then give them the permission to search for truth in the legitimate spaces and be able to discern through all the nonsense on their own. That's what we're equipping them to do, is be thinkers, not tell them how to think, but show them how thinking occurs, so they can do it on their own. That's what I believe. So thanks, Aaron.
Appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
I hope to meet you. Okay, so we had a question earlier that it's a comment. It says, if a country makes its own rules, can it in turn not be wrong, since each country thinks their ideals are the right ones? That's by a student, Libby Story. If a country makes its own rules, can it in turn not be wrong, since each country thinks their ideals are the right ones?
Is that a question for me or just for everyone?
I think it's for everyone. Anyone can take that, whoever they want. Well, in truth, the country can be wrong, but the problem is, will they realize it? That's where the challenge comes, and that's where we have a lot of human rights issues. And it's just like an organization. I know we had a question earlier, I'm going to refer to it. The question earlier is, how can ESU espouse the language of human rights while simultaneously denying the hell's theirs? Okay, this is very similar question. We're talking about this institution, and we're talking about a country. And the fact of the matter is that you can espouse human rights just like you can believe that you are the right type of nation and still be wrong, okay? And you can still be doing things wrong. The real question is, are you aware of your shortcomings? And are you turning in the direction, making the appropriate steps to be in your right mind and operate in your right way? That's really where the matter um, of change happens. So I'm going to go a little bit further here in terms of Emporia State. Um, ESU is not a perfect institution. And I've said that before, I'll say it again, I'm being recorded, so I guess you can play that back if you choose to. But guess what? There's no institution that's perfect, just like there's no body that's perfect. Um, However, I can say that, we have made a commitment to do some self evaluation individually within our departments and our divisions and across campus. And what are we doing? We are pursuing different ways to advance personal and professional development as well as organizational change, looking at policies, practices, procedures, but really attitude and culture, I think, play a heavy role in that. So, and as a nation, I think that a nation has to review its laws and see if its laws and its ways are applicable to the time and the needs of the people, just like we're doing here. So that's my answer, and I will yield to Eliah. I think I gave him enough time to think a little bit as well.
Well, yeah, I could say a few things. I mean, on the notion that every nation should be allowed to make its own rules, to set its own values. I think it's kind of a reductio ad absurdum, but I mean, if you follow that to its conclusion, then there's no basis on which we could criticize the Third Reich, or the Soviet Union, or Pol Pot's Cambodia, or any of a long list of very bad actors on the human stage, both on the international stage, on the global stage, both in the present day and in the past. So I don't know. I wouldn't feel very comfortable saying that in any robust way whatsoever. I'm not quite sure I fully grasped the question about human rights, but one of the things that's worth noting about human rights, and there's a whole literature on this, is that it's often been used by political actors very, very instrumentally, sometimes even cynically. So the Reagan administration in the 1980s, for instance, latched onto the human rights discourse as a way to pressure the Soviet Union to point out how they were bad actors, while at the same time, of course, the United States is a country whose own human rights record can be criticized. So I think when you actually look at how human rights is used politically, it's often used in very strategic and self-interested ways, and in a manner that frankly shouldn't surprise us at the end of the day, that different groups use that language for their own ends.
Right. Now we have a few minutes left here, and I have two areas that I'd like us to dig a little deeper on before we close. One of those areas is commitment, and the other area is forgiveness. And I know for some, forgiveness is a very shallow attempt at covering up wrongdoing and moving forward. And for others, they recognize the community and personal community and societal value of forgiveness in order to move progressively forward. So let's start with forgiveness first, and then I'll ask you a few questions about commitment. So share a little bit about why forgiveness entered into your writing, your article, and what is the value proposition that forgiveness offers?
Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit before the conversation began. I'm really glad you picked up on that at the end, because it's very important to me that is in there. And I take the point about forgiveness from Hannah Arendt herself, who observed, I think it was in a 1950s book called The Human Condition, she observed that without forgiveness, every injury in a society festers. Every mistake is permanent. Everything ramifies and just it gets worse and worse and worse, because human beings are fallible creatures. We're going to make mistakes, right? And so if you don't have the capacity within a society to forgive people, to move on, to accept their apology, then everything's just going to get worse, and it can never get better. So I mean, but forgiveness is actually it's a political virtue in that sense. It's a social virtue. I mean, it's not just a personal virtue. It's not just a Christian virtue. It's a social and political virtue in the sense that it's necessary for any community to heal when anything bad happens, as it inevitably will. So it was very important to me that I put that in there, partly just because I don't want myself to enact the kind of demonizing, gotcha journalism, the kind of just, self-righteous, chest pounding that so irks me when I read political reporting generally. So it was really important to me that I tried to create a space for just, I don't know what the word, I mean, healing, for trust, for a rebuilding of trust and respect, so that a community can move forward. I think that's absolutely foundational. And it's one of the things that keep culture war politics, culture war thinking, culture war journalism so prevents. It so poisons is our ability to be charitable to other people, to forgive other people.
Right.
Yeah.
On a personal level, I will say that forgiveness is difficult when you've been hurt deeply, because if your woundedness has not been acknowledged, then there's a sense of rejection and dismissal that is felt, and nobody wants to feel that way. And I think that's when the fire within a person or community will spew out if they've been oppressed or harmed. Particularly that happens with our various communities in the country, across the world, individuals that have had bad experiences at institutions. And so it's difficult. I understand that. I can relate to that, what I'm trying to say on a personal level. When you have police brutality occurring in your family, or it's occurred to you, power and authority abuse. And so it really takes a higher power within that person, for that person to surrender themselves to a higher power than themselves, than their own flesh, in order to actually forgive. The way that I want to communicate this to our public is that in most cases, people believe that forgiveness is being offered for the other person. But really, forgiveness is being offered for you. Because if you can imagine an invisible chain that has been attached to you from a wound that is coming from that other person or that situation or that institution, and that chain is never severed because of unforgiveness, then you're always locked in to that hateful relationship. And it takes your life. Not only the other person or other organization may move on, and people change and die and are born, and life continues. But for you, it's kept you in bondage. Okay, it doesn't mean forget. It doesn't mean to not hold others accountable in meaningful ways. But it means that forgiveness brings freedom from that bondage that has developed, in order for you to move on freely in whatever you're called to do in your life. Very, very important. Very important. So anyway, we've got a few minutes here. We've got about 8 minutes. I think I just want to give our audience a few takeaways here. Commitment. That's what I wanted to touch on before we close. What is it that drew you to the work that you do, and what level of commitment is required for you to do it? And we have a raised hand, but I'd like for you to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, do you mean my scholarship on the far right in general? Is that
how was that born? And it requires a high degree of commitment to do the depth of work that you do, and to have the conversations that you have. Where does that come from?
I don't know that I know. I don't know that any of us have a deep access to why we end up doing the things we do. I mean, where that comes from my personality or my biography. I mean, I would say maybe something just more generally about commitment when it comes to our political thinking. And my writing a piece like this, I've written a number of things like this. I mean, it really does follow from my scholarship. I'm very afraid of where our political culture can go, where any political culture can go. There's absolutely nothing preventing the United States or any other human society from going to the darkest places imaginable, the darkest places that countries have gone to in the past. There's no natural barrier there. So when I see erosion, I'm very, just from my own work, I'm very aware of the slide and how it happens, and the way that an impoverishment of thinking within a culture at large can take a society there. I'm very, very worried about these things. And so I feel a sense of personal responsibility to do what I can as a historian of the far right, to just push back against these things. So if somebody's using totalitarianism in a way that I think is actually counterproductive, that is, Dane Hicks thinks he's warning against totalitarianism, as though where a mask order amounts to incipient fascism somehow. He's actually contributing to a political environment in which the thing he purports to be warning against is objectively more likely to come about. And I just wanted to push back against that. And I feel a certain element of personal responsibility, I think, to do that. And just to kind of sum up, there's something in our political culture today that really, really troubles me. Most Americans, I think on the news, I was listening to the news this morning, I just heard this. Most Americans today say that they want people on both parties to work together, to have fact-based, sober discussions. They want Congress to function. And yet in our actual media diets and in the way that we participate on social media and the way that we think and talk about one another as Americans, we do the opposite. We contribute to the opposite. And what that means is that we have a tremendous amount of power. Human beings have a tremendous amount of diffused power in the language they use and the ways they choose to feel and think about other human beings in their society. We have a tremendous amount of power to change things. It could change overnight, frankly, in the direction that people say nominally they want things to go, if we would just act consistently on that basis. Just stop demonizing one another. Don't forward that meme. You don't have to do it. It's just like you don't have to do it. Nobody's, adopt charitable manners of thinking. If you're a right-wing person, have a left-wing friend and foster that friendship so that you're consistently required to see the world from somebody else's point of view. Because your own point of view is always going to be incomplete. You will never see, society whole. I mean, none of us can ever see it whole fully, but you need the corrective of other points of view. Other people will see things, be attentive to things, will have a media diet that just forces them to see things or allows them to see things that you're not seeing. So if you're a right-wing person, have a left-wing friend. If you're a left-wing person, have a right-wing friend, and foster that friendship. I think there are levels of commitment that we can all make on a very personal and practical basis to make our society, our political culture, a lot better.
Thank you, Dr. Bures. I know we had a hand up. We don't have much time at all left, but I don't want to be negligent. So, Dr. Brown, do you want to make a quick question or remark? You're there? Okay, you're on mute. You are on mute.
Just a quick question. No, not a question, a comment, and see if I get Dr. Bures's response to it. Earlier in the discussion, we talked about totalitarian movements in Germany and the Soviet Union. And in today's world, we see the rise of ethnic or ethno-nationalism, a rise of race-based nationalism around the world. And earlier, Dr. Bures seemed to say that a positive response to those came from universalist sources like Christianity, Marxism, and also classical liberalism, individual rights, and that sort of thing. And as most of us know, in recent decades, there's been a serious pushback on universalist responses. Yeah. And we sort of drifted into an ethos of pluralism, right? The pushback against universalism come because people interpreted that to be one model for all. It silenced marginalized voices, and it turns into an oppressive ideology and that sort of thing. So what is your response to that sort of dynamic?
Oh, that's a big question and a good one. I mean, you're right that liberalism is a universalist scheme too. I mean, it purports to be a system of values, a way of
Right.
ordering society that belongs everywhere. I mean, human rights does. I mean, my own preference is strongly to defend basic liberal values against the kind of ethno-nationalism, against the kind of authoritarian, particularistic, politics that seem to be on the uptick nowadays. I don't know if I have a really satisfying answer, but I don't know how to do it without doing it. So I try to defend basic liberal values, in not just in my life, but in journalism and pieces like this. And I don't have any grandiose conception that I'm making a huge difference in doing this, but if everybody does it, then it can make a difference, I think. So yeah, and by liberalism, I don't mean American progressive, Democrats. I mean fundamental liberal values, but respect for the individual, respect for pluralism in a society, a willingness to share power with other factions in a society, with other social groups. That's the kind of liberalism that it's a liberalism of the American Constitution of John Locke. That's the scheme of values that I want to defend. I fully recognize that it is itself a universalistic project that is being massively challenged by ethno-nationalist movements and authoritarian movements around the world. I fear that's not a satisfying answer, but that's all I have to say.
It's a tough issue.
Yeah.
Right. We have a couple of minutes before we close here. I want to thank our participants first and foremost for engaging us this afternoon. And also thank Dr. Brown and Dr. Emmer for being willing to engage spontaneously and be called upon. Of course, I want to thank Kelly Hine for gifting us with Dr. Bures, as well as gifting us with her insights regarding their relationship and their close childhood upbringing. And then, of course, Dr. Bures for giving us a contextual historical platform to think about contemporary issues. How do you move ideals to action? Number one, you have to check yourself. What are your ideals? And why do you have those ideals? Have you challenged those ideals in meaningful ways? And what's your interest in advancing ideals that are good for the human experience in the broadest sense? You can do that in your personal space, in your family and community, and also in your professional space. Once again, I'm Dr. Aswad Allen, ESU's Chief Diversity Officer. I can be reached at aallen29@emporia.edu. Please send me your questions, comments, and ideals for the next series. And with that, I think we're going to close. Thank you all.